Cool. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Worldviews. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Mike Licona. He's a New Testament scholar, author, and founder of Risen Jesus. He's best known for his work on the historical reliability of the Gospels and the resurrection of Jesus. Thank you for coming on Worldviews, Dr. Mike Licona.
Hey, my pleasure, Devin. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. First, to kick us off, can you share a little bit about your upbringing and how it influenced your faith journey?
Well, I was brought up in a Christian family. I became a Christian at the age of 10. I was at church. A Christian magician came and he was able, through magic tricks, his illusions, he was able to illustrate the gospel. That I don't remember how he did it. I just remember being fascinated by it. And it was, it wasn't what I did that could earn my way to heaven. It's what Jesus did on the cross and his resurrection, and through putting my faith in him, I could have, and following him, I could have eternal life. He would give me eternal life. So I I grew some spiritually during my teens, not a whole lot. Went off to a Christian university where I was a music major. I really grew there. I went to Liberty University when it was small, and I think there was like, I don't know, 2,000 students when I went, and so yeah, it was a great environment for me to grow spiritually in. And yeah, so that's how I became a Christian, grew spiritually, decided by the end of my undergrad that I wanted to learn how to read the New Testament in its original language. Um, my desire to be a professional musician at that point was waning. I didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to do something teaching scripture. And so I entered a Master of Arts degree in New Testament studies, and just focused, got as much Greek as I could, the equivalent of 5 years of graduate level Greek. Um, Started to question my faith toward the end. It wasn't anything I'd learned. It was just a matter of, how do I know this stuff is true? I had a really robust prayer life at that point, surprisingly. So it wasn't from that. I felt like I had a connection with God, but I just started questioning, how do I know that I haven't just deceived myself? And if I have, and you know, ha, do people of other faiths have these kind of experiences? Is this just all self delusion? And so that put me in a little bit of a tailspin and got me involved in looking at the evidence, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, when you were working through school and getting your sort of theological educations, did you plan on becoming a Christian apologist to the degree of actively debating people of vastly different worldviews than your own?
Not at all. That would have been the furthest thing from my mind. I mean, I did really well in grad school. It was, as as I went through, you know, elementary and the middle, we called it junior high back then, and then senior high school, and then undergraduate work in college. I just wasn't that interested, to be honest with you. And I struggled with ADD. And, it wasn't until grad school that I got really interested in this stuff. But all I wanted to do at that point is just study scripture, learn about it. I had a fantastic Greek professor, Ron Sauer, who was F.F. Bruce's final doctoral student, and he was just passionate about studying the Greek New Testament. And he just came into the classes, and he just was a light to us and gave us a passion for learning the Greek New Testament. So that's what I wanted to do, to learn it and teach it. Learn it for myself and then teach it for others. But when I started to have the doubts, that's what got me into apologetics. And it wasn't until several years later that I wanted to start helping others who were having their doubts. But even at that, when I got my master's degree, finished that in the year 2000, I still had no desire whatsoever to teach on a university campus, that kind of setting. I just wanted to, work within the church and help fellow believers. But God had some other plans for me.
Yeah, I guess when was like well, actually, since you were talking about having doubts early, have you had doubts to that strength since? Or do you think you're pretty solidified 100% within your faith?
I don't think I'll ever be 100% solidified, Devin. That's just a reality I've come to accept. Um, I have an idiosyncrasy. It's not just me, I guess. It's some others. We're just second guessers. It's just the way we're wired. Um, so I've second guessed whether I married the right woman many times. It's not because she's a bad woman. It's such an important decision. But it's not just that stuff. I second guess something simple. Did I get the right watch? Did I buy the right car? And I will second and triple and quadruple guess those things even after I've done it. So, of course, if I'm going to do that with little things like, did I get the right watch? I'm going to do it with big things like, did I marry the right person? Did I choose the right worldview? Because, the worldview that you choose is the most important decision you'll make in your life. If you get it wrong, it could cost you eternity. So that's something that I've really given a lot of thought to. And, not, that it for me, I'm doing it not, it started off as, for me, it started off as a matter of, I guess when I got real serious about it, um, or began to get serious about it, I wanted to do it to defend the Christian faith. But then when I got super serious about it, like during my doctoral work, then it was a matter of solving my doubts and really looking at this once and for all and saying, is this true? And I want to know it for me, not to defend it, not to share with others, but for me. I need to know if this is true. And so I'm going to come at this in the most unbiased manner that I can generate for myself because it was for me at that point. So, yeah, I'll probably, because it's so important, I will probably have occasional doubts and lack 100% assurance to my dying moment. Um, but I think that that's kind of typical of a lot of us. I don't look at that as necessarily bad. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish I didn't have that idiosyncrasy, but that's the way I'm wired.
Sure, and you said you questioned if it was true. Was there something particular within Christianity, or I guess the idea of God, that emphasized those doubts? Was it whether there was God at all, or was it more of problems with, I guess, biblical errors, or maybe questions of whether or not the resurrection itself was actually true?
Yeah, no, it wasn't anything in particular that bothered me. It was more like it was more of an emotional doubt. Um, but that often casts itself in a manner that you think it's intellectual doubt. So one way I have come to explain this, Devin, is sometimes I'm on a big stage, let's say at a conference or at a church, and often on those stages, they will put tape at certain points that illuminates, it glows in the dark. And the people ahead of time, the media people say, Doc, stay within the confines of this tape. Don't go on the other side of that tape. So I might have, let's say, 30 feet to move on the stage left and right. When I speak, a lot of times I will, on a larger stage, I'll move so that I can identify with people at specific parts within the audience. And um, so I'll move. So maybe they'll say, don't go beyond that tape. You'll have 30 feet in which you can move back and forth, and maybe 10 feet in which you can do backward, back and forward. And so that's really easy to do, to stay within those confines. But I'll tell you what, Devin, if someone were to take, let's say, a very stiff board that is, I don't know, let's just call it 100 feet long, but 10 feet wide, just like on stage. In fact, even extended 5 feet more, and suspend that between two skyscrapers 500 feet above the ground and say, okay, doc, now I want you to walk from one side to the other, from one end to the other. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, why not? You know you could do it, sure. If it's on the ground, I could do it really easily and never go, if you give me 10, 15 feet wide, of course I'm not going to go off of it. Well, then why won't you do it 500 feet above the ground? Well, because what if I fell? Yeah, but you're not going to do it. You know you could do it. I know I could do it, but what if I fall? And see, it's not a matter of the evidence at that point. It's a matter of the emotional fear of falling is so great that I wouldn't even try it. Even though the likelihood of my falling is next to zero, the thought that it could happen would make it so that I don't even want to participate in that. And it's the same thing with worldviews with me. It's like, okay, I look at the evidence. I'm very much convinced by the evidence that Christianity is true. I don't even think there's a close second in terms of a worldview that has the evidence going in its favor as we have for Christianity. Um, but I do think, but what if I had this wrong? What if I missed something? I'm not the smartest person in the world by a long stretch. There are a lot of people far smarter than I am. What if I'm missing something? What if I got something wrong and I just don't know it? It could cost me eternity. And so it's that kind of emotional doubt, not a lack of evidence, but emotional doubt that troubles me at times.
Yeah, and what did you say was you say you got your master's in 2000?
Yes.
Okay, and since and when did you get your PhD?
I started it 3 years later. It took me actually 5.5 years to complete it, 6 years before I actually was awarded the degree. So I finished up I was awarded the degree in the spring of 2009.
Okay, so 2000 master's, 2009 for your PhD, and when was the first, I guess, official debate that you had?
That was the spring of 2003. I debated Dan Barker at the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Ooh, that's a good start.
Yeah, that was fun. I remember him telling me beforehand it was his 39th.
Well,
Mm.
I I had him on this channel, and he told me he's had 141 debates in his life, and
Wow.
he's never been the challenger, which I thought was quite interesting. As in, no one's ever, no one's ever, or sorry, he's only been the one that beat challenged in these debates. He's never actually challenged someone else. Was that over, I guess, the resurrection, or is it over if the Gospels were reliable?
It was on the resurrection, and, it was co-sponsored by, I believe it was Crew and, the American Atheists. They had a chapter on the University of Wisconsin, campus. So, the 2 of those organizations put it together, and I remember they invited Gary Habermas initially to debate Barker. But Gary doesn't like to debate. He'll do it occasionally, but he doesn't enjoy it. And I always thought I might want to do it. I enjoyed listening, viewing Bill Craig debates. And I thought, boy, that'd be kind of fun. Um, but I never thought I would do it because, you listen to Bill Craig and the guy's just, well, he's just at a whole nother level, right? And I thought, there's just no way I'll ever be able to do that. But Gary contacted me and he said, hey, I've been asked if I would debate Dan Barker. I don't want to do it, but you've expressed some interest in debating. Would you like to do it? Would you like me to pass your name on to them? And I said, boy, I don't know. It's like I've never done it before. And he said, well, Dan is pretty sharp. But he's not a scholar, and if you're gonna debate, he'd be a really good person for your first debate. You probably know the topic better than him, so if you're gonna do it, this would be a good opportunity. So I said, "All right, let's do it." So I did, and that's how I got started.
How was that, I guess, emotionally going into that? Because it's such a I don't know if unnatural is the right word, but going into a place where you have this whole entire audience watch you defend pretty much your worldview against someone else who's trying to convince the audience that it's not true and what the implications of them believing it's not true are. I guess I know it was in 2003, and I know you've had many more after that, but how was that first one for you kind of emotionally?
Well, as I'm preparing for it, yeah, it was stressful, because I didn't know what it was gonna be like. I didn't shy away from public speaking, not that I had done much of it, but, um, that was that was never, a hesitation with me, you could say. I would have enjoyed developing as a public speaker, so I wasn't afraid of that. I just thought, well, this could be fun doing a debate. So I just worked really hard in preparation for that debate. Now, I will say that the following year, Gary got two more invitations that he declined and referred to me. One was with the leading Muslim debater at that point, Shabir Ali, and the second is with Richard Carrier. And I think he had not debated anyone at that point. Um, So I really prepared a lot for those 2, more than the Barker debate. So, I mean, real serious, preparation for those. What was interesting is, I was, new in my PhD. At that point, I was almost a year into it. By the time I debated them, I was a year into it. I think maybe 10, 11 months into it. So I was developing my own argument for the resurrection of Jesus, but this really pushed me into it because I'm thinking, all right, they're going to throw their best back at me. So I need to listen to and view and read everything they've written and said and lectured and debated on the topic, um, and then formulate my responses and anticipate what they're going to say to my arguments and counter responses and things like that. So I really prepared for those. I was drained by the time I got finished with them. With the Shabir Ali debate, I remember that afternoon before the evening of that debate, my chest hurt because I was so nervous. But as soon as the debate started, and I got up, I was the first to give my opening statement. It's like, game on, and this was fun. It just became fun. My nerves just kinda calmed, and it's like I'm into it now. And that's kind of the way it is usually with debates for me. I prepare diligently for them. I'm nervous. I'm somewhat nervous before every debate that I do. But as soon as I get started, as soon as I step up to the mic and start speaking for my opening statement, it's like, now it's just fun. I'm having a good time.
Yeah, how many debates have you had total, do you know?
37 now.
When was your last one?
Um, I need to think. I think my last one, to my recollection, was with Larry Shapiro. He's an atheist philosophy professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He and I have actually become friends. I really like the guy. I think he likes me. We get along great. We couldn't disagree more in our worldview and our politics. I mean, he is a stalwart progressive. I'm a stalwart conservative. He hates guns. I love guns. Um, I'm a Christian. He's an atheist, but I really like the guy. We really do get along fine. I mean, he wrote a book published by Columbia University Press critiquing my book on the resurrection. And it's like, okay, we've had 3 debates, 2 in person, 1 that was done, I think, for Unbelievable, that podcast. So we did it virtually. And yeah, he's a great guy. I think that's the last one I've done. So that was either last year or the year before. Seems to me there was another I did in the meantime, but I don't remember. I know I'm doing one this November with Bart Ehrmann. We're debating in Boston on the topic, who wrote the Gospels? So this is a topic that I haven't really studied in much detail before, somewhat, but I haven't gotten deep into them, and I've really wanted to. So when they were choosing a topic for a debate, I suggested that one, and Bart eventually agreed to it. And I wanted to do it because it would force me to dive deeply into it and to come to my own conclusions on the matter. So debates tend to do that with me. It makes me go really deep because I know I'm going to have to defend my position. I have to think about all the points and counterpoints involved. So for me, that's a really good way to learn a topic to prepare to debate it.
Yeah, have you debated Bart before? I thought you had.
Yeah, this would be our eighth debate.
Hey.
So we have debated on the resurrection. We've debated on the historic are the gospels historically reliable? And then we had a debate on Justin Brierley's show Unbelievable on uh, it was called Decisions. Why he we both looked at the evidence and arrived at different conclusions. He looked at Christianity and dove into the evidence for Jesus and walked away from his faith when he had doubts. I looked at it, and when I had doubts, to me, it confirmed the Christian faith, even though I still maintained some occasional doubts. So we discussed how we came to our various conclusions.
Wow. Okay, since you've had so many debates, I have to ask, who do you think this because have you debated Christians as well over, I guess, internal Christian topics?
I've only had one, uh, if I remember correctly, one debate with another Christian on a in-house topic, you could say. That was with Richard Howe. I think that was 2018 or 19. We debated on how, is the Bible inerrant? How's inerrancy best understood? And it was a pleasant debate. I like Richard. We're friends. In fact, we've become better. We were friends before the debate. We've become even better friends after the debate.
Okay. I'm curious to hear, who would you say were the smartest people you ever debated?
Smartest. Bart Ehrman's pretty smart. Um, I mean, they're all almost all of them have been pretty smart. I wanted to debate the smart ones because I want my views to be challenged so that I can look, and I want to always make sure that either I'm believing truth and or fine tuning my views, and the way that you do that is through critical engagement. Um, so the smartest, I'd have to think through all my different debates. Um, and they might be smart in different ways. Like, for example, I've debated, well, Larry Shapiro and Evan Fales. Both of them are atheist philosophers, pretty smart, not really skilled in biblical studies. So they wouldn't be my toughest opponents when talking about something like the resurrection of Jesus. Um, but if I were going to engage them in debate on the existence of God, I think I might be outclassed in something like that because they would know their arguments probably better than I would know mine. But I'd say maybe for, um, when it comes to the topics I've debated, I don't know who'd be the smartest. I think the two most challenging people I've debated have been um, Bart Ehrman. I wouldn't say because of his arguments necessarily, but because of his rhetoric. His rhetoric is really, he's a persuasive speaker. Richard Carrier has been difficult because a lot of times he will present arguments that are really out there, so far out there that nobody else is offering them. So it's hard to prepare for it. Um, you know, so yeah, those have probably been my two, what I would consider my two most difficult opponents.
Okay. Is there a debate topic that is the most challenging for you as well?
Well, the one that I'm currently preparing for, who wrote the Gospels, I mean, that's pretty challenging because I've never debated on this topic before, and I'm coming into this without having studied it a whole lot. And
Yeah.
I'm going against Bart Ehrman, who is a formidable opponent, to say the least. So, yeah, I'm preparing for this one pretty seriously, and it's fun because I'm learning a lot of new stuff. Um, I'm pretty secure, I think, with the traditional authorship of Mark and Luke because the evidence is pretty good there, pretty straightforward. Bart wouldn't agree with that, but most would. Bart takes a position that's to the left of where I think the majority of critical scholars are with Mark and Luke. Um, but Matthew and John are more difficult. Um, I haven't even began John yet, to be honest with you. But Matthew, I've spent a considerable time with now, and that's really difficult. It's more difficult than I imagined. So I don't know where I'm going to land on Matthew and John.
Yeah, and with all these debates, do you ever, like do you feel like you, like, lost a good amount, or do you feel like you've won all of them?
Well, I think I've won them all, but there'd be I think a lot of Christians might say, "Hey, you won them all." Atheists would probably say you've lost them all. There's going to be bias involved. I've got my own biases. Um, there was one debate that I was not pleased with my performance. That was against Greg Cavan, and that happened. I think it was 2012, and I just got frustrated with it with some of his arguments. And I think my frustration came through. I did ask, so I was really disappointed after the debate, but I did ask some people. I said, "So, what did you think?" And they said, "When you expressed your frustration, we could see it, but we were feeling it as well." So that that made me feel a little better about it. Um, I had in 2022, I had this 6-hour debate, virtual debate with Ehrman on the resurrection. That was fun. I enjoyed that one. Um, After the debate, I got an email from an atheist I'd never met, and he said, "Look, I viewed your debate on Saturday, and I just want to let you know that even though I'm an atheist and I agree with Bart, I don't think Jesus rose from the dead. You didn't convince me of that. Nevertheless, I do think you won the debate, and you seem like a really good guy and a gentleman. And I just want to let you know, I wanted to compliment you on it." And I thought that was pretty cool. Now, I'm sure there are probably some Christians who thought that Ehrman won that debate. So, I mean, it's kind of a subjective manner. Um, but yeah, I guess that'd be a long answer to your question.
Yeah, is there anyone you, I guess, have, like, a do you have, like, a dream debate opponent?
I did want to debate Ehrman. I wanted to debate him. And so when Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary offered to set that up, they wanted to set that up that happened in 2008. It's like, yeah, I jumped at that. I was excited. I wanted to do it because I had watched Bart debate um, William Lane Craig I think it was 2006 that he debated Bill. And, Bart was saying, as a historian, I'm doing this, and historians don't do it this way, Bill. And I'm thinking, I was in the midst of my doctoral research at that point, coming at the resurrection specifically as a historian. So I took several years. The average doctoral dissertation, takes about 2 years, maybe 3 years. My dissertation, I was working hard at that for 5.5 years. And my dissertation was 3.5 to 4 times the size of an average dissertation because I really wanted to cross every T and dot every I. I spent a lot of time doing prolegomena pertaining to the philosophy of history and historical method. That in itself was dissertation length. And so I felt confident that I knew more about the practice of history than Bart did. And so I wanted to debate him on the issue. So that's why I wanted to do that. And then I wanted to debate Dale Martin on it as well, which he was a very close friend of Bart's. He died a couple of years ago, and he taught at Yale. And he could get kind of cantankerous. So I saw him at he gave a paper, and I saw the way he was responding to some of those pushing back on the paper. It was at the Society of Biblical Literature annual meeting. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, I want to debate him. So the two people that I really wanted to debate, I got to debate. And at this point, um, I don't know. There's no one out there right now that is like, I really want to debate that person. I've gone against some of the best out there. And so there's no one I really like saying, oh, I really would like to debate that person. So yeah, I don't know how many more debates I'll do, but I've had 37.
Okay. And who would you say, I guess, if you could name maybe like these could be people you debated or just appreciate. Who do you think are like the top three Christian apologists today and the top three most impressive? I know it's not like atheist apologists, but I can say atheist advocates, you could say today.
Okay. Well, the Christian apologist, I guess I could, but that's kind of a tough question. You know, Bill Craig, I mean, I'd have to say he's the GOAT, you know? He's just in a league all by himself, I think. Now, he's not as good on the resurrection as Gary Habermas, of course, but he is good in so many areas. He's just amazing. He really amazes me a lot. So, I'd say William Lane Craig is the finest Christian apologist, I've ever, you know, been acquainted with. But then you're gonna have someone like a Lee Strobel or Frank Turek, who's going to reach more people perhaps than Bill Craig does. They're gonna do it on a more of a popular level. Now, they know the academic arguments, but they're not scholars of themselves, and they're gonna deal more pop level and deal with a lot more topics than, say, a scholar like Bill Craig is going to do. Um, so, how do you say which one's better? They deal with different audiences usually. You need your Bill Craigs because people like Strobel and Turek are dependent on them. Someone like Sean McDowell is really good. Sean crosses both worlds. You know, he's a scholar. He's got a legitimate PhD. I was the external reader of his dissertation. It's an excellent dissertation. Um, but he doesn't really interact in the scholarly world now. I remember he got his PhD and he said, I just want to move on back to do popular apologetics. He's really good at it. I could name so many more, you know, like Brett Kunkle and Greg Kokel and Alex McFarland. There are so many of these people. I don't even want to name anymore because I know I'll forget some. Um, but these are really good. And then you say, okay, well, is Craig Blomberg an apologist? Darrell Bach and Craig Evans, when they have really good arguments that can defend the Gospels in different ways and they know the Gospels extremely well, but yet they wouldn't consider themselves apologists. They're New Testament scholars. Um, and Craig Keener, they could present arguments like Keener's really good with Acts, the Gospels, Acts and the Gospels, John's Gospel. He's written a 2-volume commentary on that. So, I mean, they can do those well. It's just I would be hard pressed to say who are the top 3 Christian apologists out there because of that. Now, when it comes to atheists, I'm not so familiar with the internet apologists. Those guys are going to be, some of them are going to be really effective and in defending their cause, but I don't read them. I don't view their videos, so I couldn't name them. If you're talking about effective academic apologists for atheism, um, I might say someone like, well, the first person that comes to mind is Richard Dawkins, but even the late atheist philosopher of science, Michael Roos, said that Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, was so poorly argued, it made him embarrassed to call himself an atheist. So, but Dawkins is effective as a communicator. Um, so I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't pay attention to these. Uh, the only ones I really pay attention to are those within my own discipline of New Testament studies, and I'd have to say Bart Ehrman does a really good job of convincing people to leave the Christian faith. So I'd probably put him as the top one. But then again, if you're just talking about atheists in general, I can't answer it because I'm not familiar. I don't view or listen to them.
Sure. And how has your research personally affected how you read the Bible?
Oh, that's a fair question. Well, I so I read the Bible during the day as you could say a critic. Now, a critic doesn't mean skeptic. So, like you could have a movie critic. That doesn't mean that you're going to give a negative review of a movie. It means you're going to look at it through a critical eye to assess it. So, when I'm studying the Bible during the day in the course of my research, I'm studying it critically with an open mind, um, considering the arguments of those with whom I disagree, trying to consider those objectively, because I don't have to fear truth.
Mm.
Um, so, but at night when I'm studying, usually at night when I'm reading through the New Testament in Greek, so that's how I keep my Greek um, up to snuff. I'm just reading the New Testament in Greek. Um, so that sense, I'm reading it more devotionally at night. I don't really see where one conflicts with the other. It could conflict with the other, but again, I don't fear truth. So, some of my critical studies have led me to change some of my views, like my view on inspiration and inerrancy. I still believe the Bible is divinely inspired and it's inerrant. But my view of inspiration and inerrancy, those views differ from those of many evangelicals.
Mm. Do you identify with a specific Christian denomination?
Not really. I focus more on the essentials. So a lot of things such as that might separate a Presbyterian from a Baptist, um, and let's call it and a conservative Methodist would be the matter of Calvinism. And I'm not a Calvinist, but I do acknowledge that Calvinists have some decent arguments and they might be right. I am happy. In fact, I was a member of a Reformed church for many years, and I was fine with it. I've been in a charismatic church, and I've been comfortable there as long as the essential doctrines are followed. So that's my concern. Right now, I go to a Southern Baptist church. Um, so, but I could go to a number of different churches just as long as the essentials are there.
Yeah, so you say you went to a charismatic one. Are you referring to specifically Pentecostal?
Well, I went to one, it was an EPC, Evangelical Presbyterian Church in Virginia Beach. And I don't know if other evangelical or EPC churches are this way, but this one you could say was quasi charismatic when my wife and I attended there. When my family attended there, so occasionally you would hear a person speak in tongues in church or give a prophecy. So it wasn't unusual, but it didn't happen every week. And you might have had it twice a year, and it wasn't craziness that was going on in there. So it wasn't crazy Pentecostal or crazy charismatic. And I felt comfortable within that. And I was very open and still remain open to the gifts of the Spirit being. In fact, I'll tell you this, Devin. Um, I have a video coming out on my YouTube channel any day now on this. But I got healed Saturday or Friday. I got healed Friday. I had a sore knee, and It's been bothering me 5, 6 months, and I had it X-rayed, and I have a big, we call it a bone spur in it, and it was prohibiting me from doing some things. And our board got together Friday, Saturday, and we were all just hanging out Friday night after dinner. And we have one of our board members, she has actually healed some people. And I told her about my knee, and she said, let me pray over it. And so she did. She spoke in tongues for a few seconds, and then she prayed for my knee for probably 30 seconds to a minute. She said, all right, try that. And so I stood up, and before 6 months ago, I had worked toward doing an Asian squat. That's where you really just go down all the way, you squat all the way to the ground, like we used to do as children, really young children, or as you see Asians doing in like Vietnam and Cambodia. You see them sitting there and they're squatting down, just like whether they're eating or just sitting there relaxing. That's called the Asian squat. And a lot of Americans can't do that. I couldn't do it. I worked to a point where I could do it. My hips and ankles were flexible enough uh, that I could do that. But then my knee prohibited me from doing it. Well, I was able to pop right down into an Asian squat that I haven't been able to do for 5, 6 months. And she said, do you feel any pain? I said, yeah, I can feel some pain. All right, let me pray for you again. So she prayed again, and the pain went down somewhat. And can you still feel it? And I said, yeah, a little bit. It's better. And another one of my board members, who's a physician, he said, what's your pain level now? And I said, maybe a 2. He said, what was it just a few moments ago? I said, I couldn't have done this a couple of minutes ago. Well, what if you tried? Probably an 8. He said, that's remarkable. And it is. So it's like, I worked out today with it, and I was able to go down into the Asian squat again. Now I still have little pain, discomfort there. So will it come back? I don't know. This has never happened to me before, Devin, but it happened to me Friday. My mind was blown from this.
So this is your first sort of supernatural experience, perhaps?
Not supernatural, but because I've experienced some supernatural stuff in the past, demonic. I've experienced some radically answered prayer. I've seen that happen. But this is the first time I've been the recipient of a healing, and it's quite interesting.
Wait, what was this demonic thing?
That's a whole new thing. Um, I guess I could say, when I was in junior high and high school, and even in college, um, junior high, high school, living at home, college, coming home for semester breaks. My dad had become a Christian, and he had been in Freemasonry and had become a Shriner. You can become a Shriner once you get to the highest point with level within Freemasonry, then you can become a Shriner. You've seen commercials about Shriners and stuff. Well, when he became a Christian shortly after, he became convicted and thinking, you know what? I know some about the Masonic Lodge. And he said, I'm searching the scripture, and some of the things that we do is not right for a Christian to do. And so he started to look into it, study the origins of Freemasonry, and found that a lot of it went back to the occult. And so he started speaking in churches and went on television and radio shows. He was on the John Ankerberg show twice, nationally syndicated show, at least it was back then in the 80s and 70s. And I can tell you this, before he would do a big event, our house would become haunted. We'd have all kinds of weird paranormal phenomena that would happen in our house. So it was pretty frightful. My mom sometimes would, my dad worked shift work for the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. And there'd be times when he'd be doing the graveyard shift. And sometimes my mom, she'd tell me she'd wake up in the middle of the night, look over at the doorway to the bedroom and see a man just standing there, large man with his arms crossed looking at her. And she'd close her eyes and she'd say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave. And she'd open her eyes and it'd be gone. My dad, he'd go down when he was working the day shift. He'd go down early in the morning to have his quiet time with the Lord. He'd read scripture and then he'd turn the lights off and he'd pray, and he'd hear like footsteps walking toward him. And um, he'd command them to leave in the name of Jesus and it would stop. So he'd have that. My one sister saw a towel twirling in the air with no one holding it. Um, I've had some stuff happen. Uh, One time I was home for Thanksgiving break during college. I think it was during my graduate school years. And there was a baseball field that was about a half a mile from my house, by the junior high school I used to go to. And it was right across the street from a grocery store, the parking lot of which was all lit up. But the light would, you know, uh, go over to the field a little bit. So my eyes would get adjusted to the dark so I could see around. But if you were over there, you couldn't see what was going on in the field. Well, I had a practice where when I'd come home from break, I'd go out and I'd pray for 1, 2 hours at a shot. And it would be at night. And I'd just kind of walk around that field praying. And one time when I was home, I think from graduate school, it was during my Thanksgiving break, and I just really felt uh, just a great sense to worship God. And I just laid down on the field and I was singing to Christ and praying. And in the distance, I heard some footsteps. And at first, I thought, oh, it's just someone walking their dog. They won't even see me. But the footsteps kept I kept hearing them, and then they started coming toward me, and I wondered if the person thought they saw something and, a person laying on the field, they wanted to come check it out. So I kind of looked up over in that direction and the footsteps stopped. I thought, well, it's November. Maybe the wind's just blowing, blowing some leaves or something. So I put my head down and started to pray again, and the footsteps resumed coming toward me. So I looked up and they stopped. Well, now, based on other experiences that I had and my family had had in the house, I'm kind of getting a little spooked, wondering if this is, kind of the same kind of stuff. And so I put my head down again and start to pray, and the footsteps resume coming toward me. And I look up and the footsteps stop. And I put my head down one more time and the footsteps start running toward me. Well, then I kind of knew what it was. And I just got up and I just ran home. I got spooked. So, I mean, there would be that kind of stuff. Um, I don't even know what got us on this topic, but
Yeah, I was just diving
yeah,
into the supernatural encounters.
yeah.
Interesting. Wow. I yeah, I don't know how to accurately, like, push back on what that could have been
Well, you could
because
always come up with some sort of an explanation. And I can understand how someone who wasn't there, who did not experience it, would think, oh, Mike's just a flake. This was all in his head, whatever. But I was there. And I consider myself to be a pretty rational person. Um, and no, I heard those footsteps. And, when you look up and they stop, and then you look down and they start, and you look up and they stop, and then they run at you. And you take that in the context of these other things, it may not convince others, but I'll tell you what, I could never be an atheist. Even if I gave up at some point my Christian faith, I could never be an atheist because of that kind of stuff that I've experienced. And I know other people. I have a friend who used to be involved in witchcraft, and she's told me some things that she's experienced that, woo, that really bizarre stuff. Um, so no, I could never be an atheist because of the paranormal stuff. And I have a friend who's a Christian who experienced an apparition of a friend of hers who appeared to her in the middle of the night. And then a day later, she learned that that person had died at that very point. At the very moment that she was awakened and saw that apparition. How do you explain that? Um, You got well evidenced near death experiences. Now, I don't know anyone who's had a near death experience. I know there's a lot of them that have been documented, but I'm just saying from the paranormal phenomena, which I would interpret as demonic that I've experienced, plus what two of my friends, the former witch and then the other person who experienced the apparition, what they've experienced and relate to me, I mean, I have no doubts about a spiritual dimension of reality, which would seem to cast serious doubt and challenge to atheism.
Yeah, I've thought about that too in terms of, like, if Christianity actually, because obviously I'm a Christian, I believe it's true, but even, like, for you, what would you say would be the second most compelling worldview if Christianity was somehow disproven, or if you didn't find it to be true anymore?
I see I haven't studied um, I haven't studied Buddhism and Hinduism in depth, but I can say that I have learned, because I just look at the historical stuff, that when it comes to Buddhism, most scholars who are Buddhist scholars think that the Buddha died sometime in the 4th century BC, and that the first, or I should say, traditions of the Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha were passed along word of mouth only for at least 400 years before they got put down in writing for the first time. So there's nothing about the Buddha for which we can really have a great deal of confidence. I mean, maybe some extremely basic things about his teaching, but that's about the extent of it. When it comes to Hinduism, it's even worse. So you have the four Vedas, and they're composed at different times, but the first goes back to about 1500 years BC. Um, the first time that's communicated word of mouth only until somewhere between 600 to 300 BC. That's a lot of time. That's like an average of about 1,000 years before it gets put into writing. Now, I have to admit, it's supposed to be quite poetic in the way it is. So that could be make it easier to preserve orally through oral tradition. But we still don't know the origin of the Vedas. We don't know who first wrote these down or anything like that. When we come to the traditions about Jesus, I mean, we can go back to the eyewitnesses themselves, with oral traditions that are peppered throughout the New Testament. So that's a lot better. If I were to say the next, Islam has serious problems with it. The Quran gives a test to know if Islam is true. On at least two occasions, it says if you want to know if the Quran is divinely inspired, if it's from God, try to create a surah, a chapter like it, and you'll find that you can't do it. In fact, in one of the occurrences, it says you'll find you can't do it, and if you try, you'll be eternally damned. So it's like we'll give the test, but we're gonna try to dissuade you from taking that test. Well,
Wow.
I've taken that test, and let me tell you, it's really easy to create a surah like it. I mean, so the Quran fails its own test. And a Muslim could come back and say, yeah, but, the Quran is written in Arabic. It's a beautiful language, and you have to be able to do it in Arabic. Well, even if I granted that Arabic is a beautiful language, and I don't, um, and maybe it is written, I will say that former Muslims who are now Christians who had read the Quran in Arabic say that it is arranged and it flows very poetically in a beautiful way. So even if I grant that, though, I could say that I could do that in English. And maybe if they said, yeah, well, English isn't as nice as, it's not as beautiful as Arabic, I'd say, well, then it's just a matter of taste. Does it all come down to a matter of taste? Whether you like McDonald's or Chick-fil-A? If it just comes down to that and that's a test, that's not a very good test. Um, So I think if I weren't going to be a Christian, I would probably just be a general theist and say, I'm convinced by the arguments for God's existence, namely the arguments for a first cause, the arguments from design, um, and I do like the moral argument. So I think it's got some common sense, though I can't prove that they're objective moral values. I think deep down inside, we all suspect that morals are objective rather than subjective. At least there are some objective moral values. and that you can't get those without a creator of some sort who stands above us. Um, so I would go with a general theism that would say God exists and he's going to hold us accountable by our actions. And I would try to walk as humbly before God and live as righteously as I could. That would be, if I weren't a Christian, that's what I would do.
Okay. I'm gonna get you with 2 more, and then we can get you out of here. So, if someone was to ask you why Christianity itself is worth considering, what would you say to them in most simplistic terms?
Well, I'd say let's start with the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus, while on earth, claimed to be some really a special guy. He claimed to be chosen by God to usher in his kingdom. He claimed to be God's uniquely divine son, and he claimed to provide the way of salvation. So when you make claims like that, your critics are going to ask you for some evidence, and rightly so. And Jesus responded that the evidence he would provide is his resurrection. And so if Jesus rose from the dead, I like to say it's game, set, match. Christianity is true, period. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, we need to find something else because Christianity is a false religion. Jesus was a false prophet, and we should just abandon him. Um, so you look at the evidence for the resurrection. Now, I like what Gary Habermas came up with, the minimal facts approach, because I don't have to get into a lot of detail with it. I just go with and say, look, especially if I'm talking to a skeptic and say, look, whether a Christian, atheist, agnostic, Jewish scholar, they're going to disagree on a lot of things. So let's just, in order to eliminate bias as much as possible, let me just name a few facts that virtually all agree on. So Jesus died by crucifixion. Shortly after, a number of his followers had experiences they believed, they were convinced, were appearances of the risen Jesus to them. Most, though not nearly all, but most critical scholars grant that some of these experiences occurred to groups. Groups who thought that Jesus had appeared to them within their group setting. And then there was a skeptic who persecuted the church named Paul, who also had an experience he was convinced was the risen Jesus appearing to him. And it radically transformed his life from being a persecutor of the church to one of its most able defenders. Now, what we must do as historians is look and formulate a variety of hypotheses that attempt to account for these facts that are agreed upon by so many scholars from different theological and philosophical viewpoints. And when we do that, the resurrection hypothesis is the only one that can account adequately for those data. And thus, as a historian, I think we can say the resurrection probably occurred. We can't get into a time machine, so we can't, as historians at least, say it certainly occurred, but I think the evidence suggests that it probably occurred.
Amen. Okay, last question. If you could ask God any question knowing that he would answer right then and right there, what would you ask him?
He being God. Hmm. Other than, help me with my occasional doubts and tell me if I'm going to heaven when I die. Other than something like that, I'd probably. That's a good question. There's a lot of things I'd want to ask, like why do you allow gratuitous evil in the world? That would be evil for which it would appear that there's no benefit, such as maybe animals dying cruel deaths. It doesn't really help the animals, like to become better animals, um, something like that. But I recognize that as soon as I get to heaven, the kind of questions that I have here aren't going to matter. If we think as soon as we get to heaven, here's some questions I want to ask God. But I sometimes I imagine myself being in heaven. It's like, those questions don't even matter anymore.
Well, in this scenario, you're still alive on Earth.
Oh, okay. Well, probably the problem of evil, or you know what? I'll leave that to the philosophers to wrestle over. I'd probably say was there a Q source? I'd probably do that. Or what happened to the ending of Mark? Those would be some things that I'd want to ask.
Some scholarly questions, that sounds like. Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Any last words, tips, pieces of wisdom for the audience?
Yeah, look, we don't have to be afraid of truth. I think what we need to fear is allowing our biases to get in the way and keep us from discovering truth, and it costs us eternity. So I do think there's really good evidence to show that Christianity is true, that it tells us the truth about God, um, and how to have eternal life. I'm excited about that. If a person would like to learn more about apologetics, where I teach, Houston Christian University, we do have a minor in apologetics. We have certificate programs. Certificate programs can be done online. We have a Master of Arts degree in Christian apologetics that can also be done online or online or in person. And to get more information on that, they can go to hc.edu/defend.
There it is.
And yeah,
Cool. Great. Well, thanks, Mike.
you're welcome. Thanks for having me on, Devin.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.